They told me the metal folding chair leaning against the wall was a joke, a motivational nudge, because I had stumbled in my career at 33, but looking at the Thanksgiving table, set with heavy crystal for everyone except me, I realized the punchline was deadly serious. My parents hadn't just forgotten my place. They had carefully orchestrated my humiliation to remind me that in this house, love was a transaction, and I was currently overdrawn. The windshield wipers beat a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the gray sleet that had been following me since I left the outskirts of Chicago. It was a 3-hour drive to Briar Glen, Pennsylvania, but the distance always felt measured in years rather than miles. I gripped the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. Listening to the hum of the tires on the wet asphalt, I was 33 years old. I had a master's degree, a mortgage I had just refinanced, and the autonomy of a woman who had walked away from a 6-figure salary to save her own soul. Yet, as the exit sign for my hometown loomed in green reflectivity through the slush, I felt 12 years old again. I felt small. The anxiety had started 2 days ago with the text message. My mother, Diane Robinson, did not call. Calling required listening, and Diane preferred broadcasting. The message had arrived in a group chat that included my father, Gregory, and my younger brother, Ethan. We are doing a small Thanksgiving this year. It read, "Dinner is at 5 sharp. Do not be late. Natalie. We need to focus on family unity." There was no question mark, no invitation, just a summons. The phrase family unity sat in my stomach like a stone. It was code. In the Robinson lexicon, unity meant compliance. It meant sticking to the script. And this year, I had gone off script in a way that my parents considered unforgivable. I had quit, to them, leaving a senior marketing director position to launch a community outreach program for at-risk youth was not a pivot. It was a collapse. It was a public admission that I could not hack the pressure, that I was weak. For the last 6 months, our conversations had been brief. Chilly exchanges where they asked about my little project with the same tone one might use to ask about a malign growth. I pulled my sedan into the driveway of the house on Elm Street. It was a beautiful house. It always was. My father took pride in the lawn, even in November, and the brick facade was scrubbed clean of any moss or age. It looked like a brochure for the American dream, the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened, where voices were never raised, and where bank accounts were always full. I turned off the ignition and let the engine tick into silence. "Just get through the weekend," I whispered to the rearview mirror. "Eat the turkey. Smile at the insults. Drive home on Sunday." I had rehearsed my neutral phrases. "That is an interesting perspective. Mom, I am really happy with my choices. Dad, pass the potatoes. Please." I checked my reflection. I looked tired around the eyes, but my jaw was set. I grabbed my overnight bag and the bottle of expensive Pinot Noir I had brought as a peace offering, took a deep breath of the freezing air, and walked to the front door. I did not have to knock. The door opened before I reached the mat, and there was my mother, looking immaculate in a cream-colored cashmere sweater and dark slacks. Her hair was a stiff, perfect helmet of blonde highlights. "Hello, Natalie," she said. She did not hug me. She stepped back to let me in, her eyes immediately scanning my outfit, jeans and a thick wool coat, with a flicker of disapproval. "You made good time." Traffic was light. I lied. Inside, the house smelled of sage, roasting turkey, and lemon polish. It was the smell of my childhood, a scent that triggered a complicated mix of comfort and dread. I set my bag down and moved to hang my coat in the hallway closet. That was when I saw it, on the entryway console table, where my parents displayed the visual history of our family's success. Something had changed. For years, there had been a photo from a vacation we took to Martha's Vineyard when I was 20 and Ethan was 17. We were all smiling. Windblown and tanned, that frame was gone. In its place sat a new, larger frame, silver and heavy. It was a professional shot taken. I realized with a start, at Ethan's engagement party 3 months ago, a party I had attended, in the photo, Ethan looked dashing in a navy suit. his arm wrapped around his fiancée, Marissa Vale, who beamed with the kind of radiant, effortless beauty my mother adored. My parents stood on either side of them, looking proud, regal, satisfied. I was not in the photo. I remembered the moment it was taken. I had been standing right next to my father. I remembered the flash. I remembered the photographer saying, "Everyone squeeze in." They had cropped me out. It was not a clumsy crop. It was artful. The photo had been recentered, enlarged, and framed so that the family unit appeared complete without me. It was a seamless revision of history. I stood there, my coat half off, staring at the glossy surface. "Natalie?" Diane's voice came from the kitchen. "Are you coming to help? Or are you going to stare at the wall all day?" I blinked, forcing the hurt down into the dark, cold place where I kept everything else. I hung up my coat. "Coming," I called back. The kitchen was a hive of controlled chaos. It was a chef's kitchen, pristine and white, with marble countertops that looked like frozen milk. Marissa was there, perched on a stool at the island, chopping celery. She looked up and offered me a sympathetic, tentative smile. "Hi, Natalie," she said softly. "Good to see you." "You too, Marissa." I said I liked Marissa. She was a kindergarten teacher with a soft heart, and I often wondered if she understood the Shark Tank she was marrying into. Diane did not look up from the stove. She was stirring gravy with a rhythmic, aggressive motion. "Wash your hands," she commanded. "I need you to peel the potatoes and the carrots, and then you can polish the silver for the serving spoons." I walked to the sink. "How are you?" "Mom, how is Dad?" "Busy," she said. "Your father is in the den taking a call. Business never stops, even for holidays. Unlike some people, he does not believe in taking breaks from responsibility." The jab was quick, precise, and drew blood. I pumped the soap. "My job is pretty demanding." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice even, "we just secured a grant for the after-school literacy program. It means we can hire 2 new tutors." Diane snorted. It was a delicate, ladylike sound, but dismissive nonetheless. "A grant," she repeated. "That sounds nice, Natalie. Very quaint. Hand me the butter." She did not ask about the grant. She did not ask about the program. She handed me a peeler and a 10-pound bag of russet potatoes, then turned her back to me to discuss floral arrangements with Marissa. I stood at the sink, my back to the room, peeling skin after skin. The water was cold on my hands. I listened to them talk about hydrangeas and silk ribbons, feeling like a hired hand rather than a daughter. 20 minutes later, the back door opened and Ethan blew in, bringing a gust of cold air and the smell of cigar smoke. My brother was 30, handsome in the way typical of men who have never really been told no. He had our father's square jaw and our mother's blue eyes. Hey, he announced, rubbing his hands together. "The prodigal son returns from the garage." Diane turned, her face lighting up with a warmth she had withheld from me entirely. "Ethan, look at you. Did you bring the wine up from the cellar?" "Got the good stuff. Dad's reserve," Ethan said, placing 2 dusty bottles on the counter. He walked over and kissed Diane on the cheek, then went to Marissa and squeezed her shoulders. Finally, he looked at me. "Hey, Nat, make it in okay?" "Fine," I said, dropping a peeled potato into the water. Good, he said, his eyes sliding away from mine instantly. He looked nervous. He kept tapping his fingers against his thigh. "You are just in time," Diane cooed. "Ethan, why don't you go see if your father is ready? Tell him to pour himself a drink. You have done enough helping for now." Ethan had done nothing but retrieve wine, while I had been standing at the sink for 45 minutes, my hands cramping, but I said nothing. I focused on the potatoes. Neutral phrases. I reminded myself. Neutral phrases. We moved to the dining room at 5 o'clock exactly. My parents were sticklers for time. The dining room was the showpiece of the house, painted a deep, dramatic navy blue with white wainscoting. The chandelier, a cascading waterfall of crystal, had been polished until it hurt to look at. The table was set for a banquet. heavy linen tablecloth, the good china with the gold rim, the crystal goblets that were only used for occasions of state. A centerpiece of autumn gourds and candlelight flickered in the center. I walked in behind Marissa, wiping my damp hands on my jeans. I scanned the table. There were 4 high-backed, upholstered dining chairs arranged around the oval table, one at the head for my father, one at the foot for my mother, 2 on the side facing the window. The side facing the wall was empty. I stopped. I counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4 chairs. Gregory Robinson entered from the hallway. My father was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and a presence that sucked the oxygen out of a room. He wore a blazer and a turtleneck, looking like a retired architect in a magazine spread. He held a tumbler of scotch in one hand. "Everyone, take your places," he boomed, his voice jovial but edged with command. I stood still. "Dad," I said, "we are missing a chair." The room went silent. It was a sudden, vacuum-sealed silence that made my ears ring. Ethan looked at his shoes. Marissa looked at the chandelier, her face flushing pink. Diane began lighting the taper candles, her face a mask of serene concentration. Gregory took a sip of his scotch. He looked at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. But there was no humor in them. "Oh, that," he said. He gestured casually toward the corner of the room, near the swinging door to the kitchen. Leaning against the wainscoting was a metal folding chair. It was beige, chipped, and cold, the kind of chair you sat on at a tedious town hall meeting or in the back of a church basement. "Grab that one." "Natalie," he said. I looked at the chair. Then I looked at him. "Is this a joke?" Gregory chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. "Well, we figured since you decided to downsize your career, you are probably used to living with less. We did not want to make you uncomfortable with luxury you can no longer afford." He paused, letting the words land. "Besides," he added, his voice dropping an octave, becoming hard and flat. No seat for disappointments. The air left my lungs. It was as if he had punched me in the throat. I looked at Diane. She was smoothing a napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at Ethan. He was pale, a fixed, sick smile plastered on his face. But he said nothing. He did not defend me. He did not offer me his chair. Marissa made a small, choked sound. "Gregory, Shirley," she started. "Sit down." "Marissa," Diane said sharply, "it is just a family joke. Natalie has a sense of humor. Do you not?" Natalie? This was the trap. If I fought back, if I cried, if I stormed out, I was the hysterical daughter. I was the dramatic one who ruined Thanksgiving. I was the failure who could not take a joke. If I stayed, I accepted the humiliation. I looked at the folding chair. I looked at the heavy velvet-upholstered throne my brother was lowering himself into. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My instinct was to flip the table, to scream that I was building something meaningful while they shuffled paper and hid money, but years of conditioning held me fast. I was trained to keep the peace. I was trained to swallow the poison and smile. I took a breath. I forced the muscles of my face into a rictus that resembled a smile. "Got it," I said. My voice sounded tinny in my own ears. I walked to the corner, picked up the metal chair, and carried it to the empty side of the table. It unfolded with a loud, harsh clack that echoed in the silent room. I sat down. The metal was cold against my legs. I was significantly lower than everyone else. I felt like a child allowed to sit at the grown-up table on sufferance. "Now that we are all settled," Diane said, beaming as if nothing strange had happened, "let's look at the place settings. I made them myself this year." I looked down at the table in front of me. There was a charger plate, a napkin, and silverware. But there was something missing there, too. In front of Gregory, a stiff cardstock tent read, "Father in elegant calligraphy." In front of Diane, Mother. In front of Ethan, Son. In front of Marissa, our future daughter. My spot was empty. No card, no name. It was not an oversight. You do not print 4 cards and forget the 5th person you invited weeks ago. This was a ritual. It was a systematic erasure. They were telling me, without shouting, that I no longer held a title in this family. I was not daughter. I was not Natalie. I was a space they were reluctant to fill. I looked up and caught Marissa staring at me. Her eyes were wide, watery with distress. She looked horrified. She reached out a hand as if to touch my arm across the table, but then glanced at Diane and pulled back, afraid. Ethan let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "The turkey looks great. Mom, really, smells amazing." "Yes," Gregory said, carving the bird with surgical precision. "Let us eat." The dinner was an exercise in torture. The folding chair dug into my back. Every time I moved, the metal screeched against the hardwood floor. Announcing my lower status, the conversation flowed over my head, passing back and forth between the four of them. They talked about the club, about the price of real estate, about the wedding plans. "So, Marissa," Gregory said, spooning stuffing onto his plate, "have you picked a date yet? We need to know for the trust distributions." "We were thinking June," Marissa said, her voice quiet. She was barely eating. "June is good." Diane nodded. "June is respectable. We can do the reception at the country club. I have already spoken to the board about reserving the ballroom. We haven't really decided on a venue." Marissa began. "Nonsense," Gregory interrupted. "You will have it at the club. We have a reputation to maintain. We cannot have you getting married in some barn or backyard." He glanced at me as he said backyard, his lip curling slightly. I cut my turkey. It was dry. I chewed methodically, tasting nothing. "Natalie," Diane said suddenly, "I hope you are not expecting leftovers. We did not buy extra containers. Since you are living on such a tight budget, I assumed you would not have room in your fridge anyway." I set my fork down. The metal clinked against the china. "I am fine. Mom, I have plenty of food in Chicago. Do you?" Gregory asked. "Or are you eating ramen noodles like a college student?" I heard the salary for those nonprofit jobs is essentially volunteer work. It is a competitive salary. I said, my voice tight. "And the work matters. We are helping kids who have nothing." Gregory laughed. He wiped his mouth with his linen napkin. "You are 33. Natalie, you should be helping yourself. You had a career track. You had potential. Now you have a cause. Causes do not pay the bills. Causes do not get you a seat at the table." He gestured with his fork at my folding chair. Case in point. I gripped the edge of the table. I looked at Ethan, silently begging him to say something. To say, "Dad, stop." To say, "She's doing good work." Ethan took a long drink of wine. He did not look up. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of clinking cutlery and veiled insults. I felt a strange dissociation, as if I were floating near the ceiling, watching this family dissect one of their own. I realized then that I did not hate them. I was terrified of them. I was terrified of how easily they could strip away my dignity, how practiced they were at making me feel like an intruder in my own history. When the meal ended, Diane stood up. "Ethan, Gregory, go to the den. Coffee and brandy. Marissa, you can help me clear." "And me?" I asked, standing up. The folding chair scraped loudly. "You?" Diane looked at me as if she had forgotten I was there. "Oh, you can just stay out of the way. Natalie, you have done enough damage to the mood for one night." I stood there, stunned, as they bustled away. I was not even allowed to clean. I was a contagion. I lingered in the dining room for a moment, listening to the voices fading into the kitchen and the den. I needed water. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. I moved quietly toward the kitchen, intending to slip in and grab a glass from the tap. The swinging door was slightly ajar. I heard my mother's voice, low and urgent. "Needs to be signed by Friday. Gregory, we cannot delay this. She will sign it." My father's voice replied. It was the voice he used for business deals, devoid of emotion. "We just have to keep her calm until then. If she gets suspicious, the whole thing falls apart." She noticed the chair. Diane hissed. Of course she noticed the chair. That was the point. Break her down. Make her feel lucky we are even letting her stay here. A confident Natalie asks questions. An insecure Natalie does what she is told. I froze. My hand hovered over the door. Is the notary ready? Diane asked. 1100 hours Friday morning, Gregory said. I told Ethan to keep his mouth shut. If he talks, I will cut him off too. I stepped back. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they would hear it through the wood. Documents, Friday, notary. This was not just about me quitting my job. This was not just about being a disappointment. The missing seat was not a joke. It was a strategy. I turned and fled. I moved silently through the hallway, past the new family photo that erased me, and up the stairs to my old bedroom. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard in the darkness. I fumbled for the light switch. The room flooded with illumination. It was a museum of my adolescence, the debate team trophies, the framed diploma, the pastel bedding. It smelled of dust and old lavender. I walked to the dresser, needing to put my keys somewhere, needing to anchor myself. That was when I saw it. Sitting on the corner of the dresser, next to a ceramic jewelry dish I had made in 8th grade, was a small, thin stack of envelopes. They were addressed to me, Ms. Natalie Robinson. But the address was here, 1402 Elm Street, Briar Glen, Pennsylvania. I frowned. I had forwarded my mail to Chicago 10 years ago. Why was I getting mail here? I picked up the top envelope. It was from a bank, Linden Federal Credit Union. I did not bank with Linden Federal. I picked up the second one, an insurance notice. Policy update. Urgent. I looked at the postmarks. October, September, August. These letters had been arriving for months. My parents had never told me. They had been collecting them, stacking them here. Or maybe they had forgotten to hide this stack in the chaos of the holiday prep. I held the letters in my hand. They felt heavy, radioactive. Downstairs, I heard my father laugh. It was a loud, booming sound. The sound of a man who believes he is in total control. I looked at the folding chair in my mind. I heard his voice. No seat for disappointments. I looked at the unopened mail. They wanted me to feel small so I would not look closely. They wanted me broken so I would sign something on Friday without reading it. I sat down on the edge of my childhood bed. I did not open the letters yet. I just held them, feeling the sharp edges of the paper against my skin. The tears I had been holding back all night evaporated. The sadness burned off, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I was not just a disappointment, I was a target. And for the first time in my life, sitting in the room where I used to dream of escaping them, I realized that I was not going to let them win. I turned off the light, clutching the stolen mail in the dark, and listened to the silence of the house. It was not a peaceful silence anymore. It was the silence of a held breath before the scream. I waited for morning. I woke up before the sun. The room was gray and cold, the kind of stillness that felt heavy, like a held breath. My first thought wasn't about the holiday or the coffee I desperately needed. It was about the stack of envelopes on the dresser. They sat there like a physical weight, pulling my eyes across the room. I slipped out of bed, the floorboards creaking under my feet, and picked them up again. In the morning light, they looked even more out of place against the pastel innocence of my childhood room. Linden Federal Credit Union, Briar Glen Title Escrow, Reliant Casualty Insurance. I sat on the edge of the bed and slid a fingernail under the flap of the bank notice. My hands were steady, but my stomach was rolling. Inside was a statement for a high-yield liquid asset account. The account holder was listed as Natalie J. Robinson. I didn't have a middle name. I stared at the J. It was a typo, maybe. But banks didn't usually make typos on account headers. I scanned the dates. The account had been opened in June. The balance was $0, but there had been a deposit of $5,000 in July, followed by an immediate withdrawal 3 days later. I opened the insurance letter next. It was a policy renewal for a property liability plan. The address listed wasn't my apartment in Chicago. It wasn't my parents' house on Elm Street. It was for a property at 4402 Cedar Hollow Heights. I had never heard of Cedar Hollow Heights. I checked the postmark on the third envelope. August. This wasn't junk mail. This was a paper trail of a life I wasn't living, being routed to a house I didn't live in. I dressed quickly, shoving the letters into the bottom of my bag. I needed answers, but I couldn't demand them. Not yet. If I stormed downstairs waving papers, Gregory would shut down, and Diane would cry and accuse me of ruining the weekend. I needed to be strategic. I needed to be the daughter they expected. Polite, confused, and ultimately compliant. I found Diane in the kitchen. She was already dressed, wearing a crisp blouse and holding a mug of tea, staring out the window at the frost-covered lawn. "Morning, Mom," I said, keeping my voice light. She turned, her expression tightening for a fraction of a second before smoothing into a smile. "Good morning, Natalie. Sleep well?" "Fine," I lied. I walked to the coffee pot. "Hey, I noticed some mail on my dresser last night. Weirdest thing. It looks like some bank stuff got sent here by mistake. Do you know why that would be?" I poured the coffee, keeping my back to her, listening for the shift in her tone. "Oh, that," she said. Her voice was breezy, too breezy. It sounded rehearsed. "We noticed it a few months ago. Your father said it was probably just a glitch in the system since you moved around so much. We didn't want to burden you with it while you were transitioning careers. You had enough on your plate." I turned around. She was smiling, but her eyes were alert, watching me over the rim of her mug. "Burden me?" I asked, forcing a chuckle. "It's just mail, Mom, but I should probably call them to correct the address. I don't want to miss anything important." Diane waved a hand dismissively. "Don't worry about it. Your father is handling it. He knows the branch manager at Linden. He said he would get it sorted out so you wouldn't have to deal with the bureaucracy. You know how he is. He likes to fix things. He likes to control things." I thought, "That is nice of him," I said. "But really, I can make a call." "Natalie," she said, her voice dropping that octave that signaled the end of a discussion. "It is a holiday weekend. Let your father take care of it. Just relax. That is why you are here. Isn't it? To reset?" It was a command, not a question. "Be the child. Let us handle the adult business." "Okay," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "I won't worry about it." "Good," she said. She checked her watch. "Now, hurry up. We have a lot to do before tomorrow. The family meeting is at 10 o'clock sharp on Friday. We need everyone present and focused." "Right," I said. "The meeting." I finished my coffee and told her I was going into town to see a friend. She frowned but didn't stop me. I met Tessa Hart at a coffee shop on Main Street called The Roasted Bean. It had been a dusty antique store when we were in high school, but now it was all exposed brick and Edison bulbs. Tessa was waiting at a corner table, looking exactly like herself. Wild curly hair, a vintage band t-shirt, and an expression of permanent skepticism. "Nat!" she yelled, jumping up to hug me. "God, you look corporate, but good." "Thanks," I said, hugging her back. "You look like you just came from a protest." I did. Actually, save the library. It's a whole thing. She pulled me into a chair. "So, how is life in the Robinson Fortress? Did they let you in the front door? Or did you have to use the service entrance?" I laughed, but it came out brittle. "You have no idea." I told her about the photo, the folding chair, the "no seat for disappointments" line. Tessa's jaw dropped. "No, they did not say that." Verbatim. I said, "That is psychotic. Nat, that is not passive-aggressive. That is just aggressive." "Why did you stay?" "Because," I said, tracing the wood grain of the table. "If I leave, they win. They get to tell everyone I had a tantrum and ruined Thanksgiving. I just want to get through the weekend, sign whatever stupid support agreement they want me to sign, and go back to my life." Tessa frowned. "Support agreement?" "Yeah. I overheard them talking. They want to have a family meeting tomorrow. I think they are going to offer to help me out financially since I took a pay cut. But there will be strings attached. There are always strings." Tessa stirred her latte slowly. "Nat, are you sure they are in a position to help anyone?" "What do you mean?" Tessa leaned in, lowering her voice. "It is a small town. People talk. My cousin works at the country club, in the billing department. She mentioned that your dad's membership dues were 3 months late. He paid them eventually, but Gregory Robinson is never late. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. Late? Yeah. And there is a rumor that his development company, Robinson Holdings, lost a big contract with the city for that new medical park. I shook my head. He would have told us. He tells us everything about his business wins. Exactly, Tessa said. He tells you about the wins. She took a sip of her drink. Watching me closely, there is something else. A lot of the bigger houses in your neighborhood have been refinancing lately. It is like a quiet wave. People pulling equity out to cover whatever. I heard your parents' house might be on that list. I thought about the bank notice in my bag. High-yield liquid asset account. Cedar Hollow Heights. Refinancing. I repeated. I am just saying, Tessa said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Be careful. If they are offering you money, ask where it is coming from, or maybe ask what they want in return. I drove back to the house with a knot in my stomach. The sky had turned a bruised purple, threatening snow. When I pulled into the driveway, Ethan was washing his car. It was 40 degrees out, but he was in a t-shirt, scrubbing the hood of his BMW with a kind of manic intensity. I parked and walked over. Hey, he jumped, startled. Jesus, Nat, don't sneak up on me. I walked up the driveway. He sighed, tossing the sponge into a bucket of soapy water. Right, sorry, I am just stressed. About the wedding? I asked. About everything, he said. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his face softened. Hey, about last night. I waited. The chair thing, he said, looking down at his wet boots. That was messed up. I should have said something. Yeah, I said. You should have. You know how they get. Though, he said, rushing the words. Once Dad gets an idea in his head. It is like a freight train. If I had tried to swap seats with you, it would have just made it a bigger scene. He would have gone on a tear about me undermining his authority. I just wanted to keep the peace. Keep the peace. The Robinson family motto. It wasn't funny. Ethan, I said quietly. It was cruel. I know, he said. I know. But look, just hang in there until tomorrow. Once we get through the meeting, everything will go back to normal. They just need to feel like they are in charge. You know? If we just let them steer the ship. They calmed down. I looked at my brother. He was 30 years old, a grown man with a fiancé and a career. Yet he was standing in his parents' driveway talking about surviving them like they were unpredictable weather. He had learned to make himself small to fit into their narrative. He minimized their cruelty so he didn't have to confront the fact that he was complicit in it. Is that what we are doing? I asked. Just letting them steer? It is easier. Nat, he said, picking up the sponge again. It is just easier. He turned back to his car, scrubbing a spot that was already clean. Inside, the house was warm and smelled of cinnamon. Diane was in the living room, arranging throw pillows. She looked up when I entered. Did you have a nice time with your friend? She asked. It was good to catch up. I said, good. Your father and I were talking. We really want you to stay until Sunday. Don't try to rush back to Chicago on Saturday. The roads will be bad. I have work on Monday. Mom, Monday is Monday, she said firmly. Sunday is family. Besides, we have so much to discuss. Friday morning is just the beginning. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile that said, you are not leaving until we are done with you. I went upstairs to my room. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. I felt a wave of shame wash over me, hot and prickly. I was 33. I was an independent woman. Why was I still terrified of these people? Why did their approval still feel like oxygen? Why did I feel like a child caught sneaking out after curfew just because I had coffee with a friend? I was embarrassed by my own fear. And that embarrassment made me doubt myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the mail really was a mistake. Maybe the missing seat was just a bad joke. Maybe Tessa was wrong about the money. Maybe I was just looking for a villain because I felt insecure about my job. I needed to ground myself. I needed something real. I remembered an old photo album from when I was a kid. Real snapshots. Not the curated, framed lies downstairs. It used to be in the basement, in a plastic bin with my old yearbooks. I wanted to see a picture of myself where I looked happy, just to remind myself that I existed before I became a disappointment. I waited until I heard the television go on in the den. Then I crept down the back stairs to the basement. The basement was finished, carpeted in beige, but the storage room in the back was raw concrete and shelves. It smelled of damp cardboard. I pulled the string for the overhead bulb. The shelves were lined with labeled bins. Holiday decor, Ethan's sports. Taxes. 2010 to 2015. I found the bin labeled Natalie, school/MISC. I pulled it down. It was heavy. I sat on the cold concrete floor and popped the lid. Inside were my yearbooks, a few ribbons from track meets, and a stack of art projects. I dug to the bottom, looking for the red photo album. It wasn't there. But there was a file folder lying flat at the bottom of the bin. It was a standard manila folder, but the label was handwritten in my father's blocky, aggressive script. N.R. Temp. I frowned. N.R. Natalie Robinson. Temp? Temporary? I opened the folder. It wasn't childhood photos. It was a stack of photocopied documents. The top page was an application for a home equity line of credit. The applicant's name was Gregory Robinson. The co-applicant was Natalie Robinson. I flipped the page. There was a signature line at the bottom, Gregory Robinson, and next to it, Natalie Robinson. I stared at the signature. It was a looping, elegant scrawl. It looked exactly like mine. It had the same distinctive N, the same flair on the R. If I hadn't known better, I would have sworn I signed it. But the date next to the signature was 3 weeks ago. I was in Chicago 3 weeks ago. I was running a fundraising gala. I was nowhere near Briar Glen. I flipped to the next document, a power of attorney form, granting Diane Robinson full authority to act on behalf of Natalie Robinson regarding real estate transactions associated with 4402 Cedar Hollow Heights. Signed, dated 2 months ago. My hands started to shake, not a little tremble, but a violent shivering that made the papers rattle. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a glitch. Someone had practiced my signature. Someone had perfected it. I pulled out my phone. My fingers felt numb, clumsy. I opened the camera app. I snapped a photo of the loan application. Flash. I snapped a photo of the power of attorney. Flash. I snapped a photo of a credit card application I found at the back of the stack. I wasn't taking photos because I was afraid of getting caught. I was taking them because my brain was refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. I needed proof that this was real. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. My parents, the people who lectured me on integrity, who punished me for lying about homework when I was 10, had stolen my identity. They were using me. The shame I had felt earlier evaporated, replaced by a cold, nausea-inducing horror, the no-seat joke, the small Thanksgiving, the family unity. It was all a distraction. They needed me here, physically present, to legitimize something. Maybe the notary on Friday wasn't for a support agreement. Maybe they needed me to sign something in person to cover their tracks. I put the papers back in the folder. I placed the folder back in the bin. Exactly how I found it. I put the lid on. I stood up. The basement spun slightly. I went back up the stairs. My steps silent. I didn't go to the kitchen. I went straight to my room and locked the door. I sat on the floor with my back against the wood, listening to the muffled sounds of the TV downstairs. I Googled legal hotline identity theft consumer protection. I found a number for a nonprofit legal aid service that operated until 8 p.m. I dialed. My breath was shallow. Thank you for calling the Consumer Rights Advocacy Group. This is Mark. How can I help you? Hi, I whispered. I think I found some documents. Okay, Mark said, his voice calm and professional. What kind of documents? Loan applications? Power of attorney? They have my name on them, and my signature. But I didn't sign them. Are these documents original or copies? Copies. I found them in a file in my parents' basement. There was a pause on the line. Are you currently in the house? Yes. Okay, listen to me carefully. Do not confront anyone yet. If you confront them without the original documents or a police report, they can destroy the evidence. Copies are good, but originals are better. Do you know where the originals might be? No, I said, maybe in my father's office, but it is locked. Okay, you need to secure your credit immediately. Place a freeze on all 3 bureaus. Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. Do it tonight. Do you have access to a computer? Yes. Do that first. Then, you need to get a copy of your full credit report. Look for any inquiries you didn't authorize. If they have a power of attorney, they might have opened accounts you don't know about. I closed my eyes. Power of attorney. That meant they could do anything. They could sell my car. They could take out loans in my name. What do I do about the signature? I asked. It looks so real. That is forgery, Mark said, and if it is being used to secure loans, it is bank fraud. That is a federal crime. If you want to pursue this, you are going to need a lawyer, not a hotline. A real lawyer. I hung up. Federal crime. My father. My mother. I sat there for a long time. I felt like I was grieving. I was grieving the parents I thought I had. I was grieving the hope that this weekend would be a reset. I was grieving the safety of being their daughter. I stood up and unlocked the door. I needed water. I needed to wash the taste of bile out of my mouth. I walked down the hallway. The house was quiet now. They must have gone to bed. I passed the dining room. The lights were off, but the moonlight from the window illuminated the table. It was still set. The china, the crystal, the centerpiece. It was frozen in time, waiting for the next performance. I walked over to the buffet table. I opened the top drawer, looking for a coaster. Inside, tucked in the back corner, was a small, white card. I picked it up. It was a place card. Elegant calligraphy. Natalie. It wasn't missing. They hadn't forgotten to print it. They had printed it. And then someone, my mother, presumably, had taken it and hidden it in this drawer. They had the card. They just chose not to put it on the table. The cruelty was meticulous. It was planned. They had sat around, discussing the optics, and decided that hiding my name would be a good motivator, a good way to break me down so I would be grateful for whatever scraps they threw me on Friday. I put the card back in the drawer. I went back to my room. I didn't drink any water. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My phone clutched in my hand. I froze my credit files. It took 20 minutes. Click, click, click. Then, just as I was drifting into a fitful, anxious sleep, my phone buzzed. I picked it up. A text message. Unknown number. Area code 215. Local. Stop digging. They're not telling you the whole story. I stared at the screen. The light was blinding in the dark room. Stop digging. Someone knew I was looking. Someone knew I had found the file. Or the mail. Was it Ethan? Marissa? Or was it someone else? Someone who knew about Cedar Hollow Heights. They're not telling you the whole story, I typed back. My fingers trembling. Who is this? I watched the 3 dots appear, then disappear, then nothing. I lay in the dark, the phone glowing next to me, listening to the silence of the house. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a trap, and I was right in the middle of it. I woke with the sharp, disorienting sensation of being watched. The morning light was filtering through the sheer curtains, casting long, pale shadows across the floorboards. I lay still for a moment, listening. The house was silent, but the air felt disturbed, as if someone had just left the room. I sat up and looked at the door. I had locked it. I vividly remembered turning the small brass thumb turn before collapsing into bed. Now, it was cracked open a fraction of an inch. A cold prickle of fear raced down my spine. I threw off the covers and walked to the door. Checking the lock. It was disengaged. It was an old house. Maybe the latch hadn't caught properly, or maybe someone had a key. I turned back to the room. Nothing looked obviously disturbed. My phone was still on the nightstand. My purse was on the chair. But then I looked at my suitcase. I had left it zipped closed at the foot of the bed, aligned perfectly with the rug's edge, a habit from years of living in small apartments where order was necessity. Now, it was shifted, just slightly, maybe 3 inches to the left, and angled, as if someone had nudged it with their foot while standing over the bed, or as if they had opened it, searched it, and put it back not quite right. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stood there in my pajamas, feeling a violation that was far more terrifying than a shouted threat. This was intimate. Someone had come into my room while I slept, breathed the same air, and looked at me. It was a power move. A reminder that there were no locks in this house that Gregory and Diane Robinson did not control. I checked the contents of the suitcase. My clothes were there, my toiletry bag, but the zipper pull on the inner pocket was on the left side. I always left it on the right. They had been looking for something, the mail, the documents, or just checking to see if I had brought anything that could hurt them. I dressed quickly, my hands shaking as I buttoned my shirt. I shoved the bank letters deep into the inside pocket of my coat hanging in the closet, deciding that was safer than my bag. I needed coffee. I needed to see their faces. I found Marissa alone in the kitchen. She was standing by the coffee maker, staring into a mug as if it held the secrets of the universe. When I walked in, she jumped, nearly spilling it. "Oh, Natalie, you scared me." "Sorry," I said, moving to the counter. "I didn't sleep well." She looked at me, her face pale and devoid of makeup. She looked younger, more vulnerable than the poised fiancé in the photos. "I didn't either," she admitted quietly. We stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the gurgle of the coffee pot. "Natalie," she said suddenly, not looking at me. "I didn't know. About the chair." I turned to her. "I believe you. Diane told me it was a tradition," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "She said that in your family, you have this funny thing where you remove the seat of the person who needs the most motivation for the coming year. She called it the hot seat. She made it sound charming, like a quirky family ritual." I laughed, a harsh, short sound. "Charming? I know," Marissa whispered, when Gregory said that line. "No seat for disappointments." I felt sick. I didn't know what to do. I just froze. "I'm so sorry. It's not your fault." "Marissa," I said softly, "they are very good at framing things." She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Is it always like this? The tests?" I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter. I hadn't added sugar. "Always." I said, "It's not about love. It's about performance. If you perform well, you get the velvet chair. If you stumble, you get the folding chair. Or worse." Marissa shivered, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. "It makes me wonder what happens if I stumble." I didn't answer her. I didn't have to. We both knew. I found Ethan in the garage again. It seemed to be his safe space, a place of tools and oil where emotions couldn't reach him. He was organizing a shelf of paint cans, moving them from one side to the other for no apparent reason. "Ethan," I said. He flinched. "Morning, Nat. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I found a file in the basement," I said, with my name on it, "and copies of loan applications I never signed." He stopped moving the cans. His back went rigid. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. His voice was too quick, too high. "Don't lie to me. Ethan, you're terrible at it. There were documents with my signature on them, dated 3 weeks ago. Did you sign them?" He turned around then. His face was flushed, his eyes darting to the door leading back into the house. "I didn't sign anything, okay? I swear." "Then who did?" He ran a hand through his hair. A nervous, jerky gesture. "Look, Nat, can you please just not do this here? Not now. They are already on edge. Dad is pacing around like a caged tiger. If you start asking questions, it's going to blow up. So I should just let them commit fraud?" I asked, my voice rising. "Shh," he hissed, stepping closer. "It's not fraud. Natalie, it's creative financing. They just need to move some assets around. Dad has a plan. He always has a plan. He just needs a bridge to get to the next quarter." "A bridge using my credit score? Without my permission?" He grabbed my arm. His grip was desperate, not aggressive. "Please, just wait until the meeting tomorrow. Hear them out. Maybe it's not what it looks like. Just don't blow up the holiday. Please." "For me?" I looked at my brother. He wasn't protecting me. He wasn't even really protecting our parents. He was protecting his own comfort. He was terrified of the explosion. and he was willing to let me be the collateral damage if it meant keeping the peace for another 24 hours. I pulled my arm away. "I'm going for a walk," I said coldly. I walked down the driveway and out of the neighborhood. I needed to make a call, and I couldn't do it in that house. I walked until I was 3 streets away, standing under a bare oak tree. The wind was biting, but I didn't care. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for Linden Federal Credit Union. I had looked it up the night before. Linden Federal. "How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to the loan department, please, regarding a pending application." "One moment." The hold music was a cheerful jazz tune that felt mocking. Finally, a woman answered. "Loan department. This is Sarah." "Hi, Sarah. My name is Natalie Robinson. I'm calling to check the status of a home equity application connected to my parents' address, 1402 Elm Street." There was the sound of typing. "Robinson. Ah, here it is. Gregory and Natalie Robinson. Yes, I see the file." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was real. "It looks like the application is currently in a paused status," Sarah said. "We are just waiting on the final verification of income for the co-borrower." "That would be you, correct?" I closed my eyes. They had applied. They had used my name. "Who submitted this application?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "It was submitted in person at our branch on October 15th. Sarah said, "By Mr. Robinson," and it looks like the co-borrower forms were signed and submitted at the same time. October 15th. I was in a board meeting in Chicago. "Is there a problem?" "Ms. Robinson?" Sarah asked, sensing the hesitation in my voice. "No," I said quickly. "I just wanted to confirm the status." "Thank you." I hung up before she could ask more questions. If I reported fraud now, over the phone, it would trigger an immediate investigation. The police would be called. My parents would be arrested. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I needed to know why. I started walking again, my mind racing. Why did they need me? Gregory was a developer. He had assets. He had properties. Why did he need his disappointment of a daughter to co-sign a loan? Unless he didn't have assets anymore. If his credit was shot, if he was over-leveraged, he would need a clean name, a fresh host to attach the parasite to. And Ethan had hinted at this. Creative financing, just a bridge. They were drowning, and instead of asking for a life raft, they were trying to use me as a stepping stone to keep their heads above water. My phone buzzed. It was Tessa. "Hey, can you talk?" I called her back immediately. "Yeah, I'm walking." "What's up?" "Okay, this might be nothing," Tessa said, her voice breathless. "But I just ran into Mrs. Gable, you know, the nosy lady who works at the bakery. She's also the receptionist at Briar Glen Title Escrow on Tuesdays and Thursdays, okay? I asked her if she had seen your mom lately. Just fishing, and she said, "Oh yes, Diane was just here last week. She said she was picking up paperwork for the church." "So?" I asked. "Mom is on the vestry." "That makes sense." "Nat, the title office is on the south side of town. The church uses a lawyer in the next county. My mom is the treasurer. I checked. They have never used Briar Glen Title for anything." I stopped walking, and Tessa continued. "Mrs. Gable said Diane seemed really stressed. She was arguing with one of the escrow officers about a timeline acceleration. She kept saying, 'My daughter will be here on Thursday. It has to be ready. Thursday. Thanksgiving.' They weren't just refinancing the house. They were transferring something, or closing something. 'Cedar Hollow Heights,' I whispered. 'What?' Tessa asked. 'Nothing.' I said, 'Just, thank you.' Tessa, keep your ears open." I hung up. The pieces were clicking together like the tumblers of a lock. The mail I found, the insurance for Cedar Hollow Heights, the power of attorney, the loan application. They were trying to close a deal on a property I didn't know about, using my credit, and they needed me to sign the final papers on Friday. The support agreement was a cover. They were going to slip the real documents into the stack, relying on the chaos and my emotional exhaustion to keep me from reading them. I walked back to the house. When I walked into the kitchen, the atmosphere had shifted. Diane was chopping vegetables with manic energy. Gregory was sitting at the island, reading the paper. "Where have you been?" Diane asked sharply. "You have been gone for an hour. I needed you to go to the store for cream." "I went for a walk," I said, taking off my coat. "A walk?" Gregory lowered the paper. "You just left? Without asking if we needed help?" "I needed fresh air," I said calmly. Diane's smile tightened until it looked painful. "Well, that is very nice for you, Natalie. Meanwhile, I have been here slaving away to make this holiday perfect. But please, enjoy your fresh air." I didn't apologize. I didn't scramble to explain. I just stood there. "Actually," I said, testing the waters, "I'm going to go upstairs and read for a bit. I'll come down when dinner is ready." It was a small boundary, tiny, but in the Robinson house. It was a declaration of war. Diane dropped the knife. It clattered loudly on the cutting board. "Read?" she repeated. "You are going to read?" Gregory stood up. He walked over to me. For a second, I thought he was going to yell. I braced myself. But his face changed. The anger melted away, replaced by a warm, crinkling charm that was even more terrifying. "Now, Diane," he said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Let the girl relax. She's had a hard year. Let her decompress." He turned to me, his eyes gleaming. "You go rest up, kiddo. How about I make you a hot cocoa? Like I used to when you were little?" The whiplash was dizzying. One second I was selfish. The next I was kiddo. "No thanks. Dad," I said, "I'm good." "Suit yourself," he said, winking. "Just be ready for tomorrow. Big day. We are going to get everything sorted out. You will see. We are going to take care of you. Take care of me. Like a problem to be solved. Like a loose end to be tied up." I went upstairs, my skin crawling. The charm was the final confirmation. If they were yelling, they were just angry. If they were charming, they were manipulating. They needed something. I sat on my bed and pulled out my phone. I looked at the text from the unknown number again. "Stop digging. They're not telling you the whole story." I typed, "Who is this?" I waited. 1 minute, 5 minutes, then a buzz. "Someone who knows what they did to your grandmother's will." I stared at the screen. My grandmother, Gregory's mother. She had died 5 years ago. I had been told she left everything to my father because she wanted to keep the business in the family. I had never questioned it. I was grieving. I didn't care about the money. But now, what did they do? I typed, "Ask them about the codicil." The reply came, "Ask them why the house on Cedar Hollow was never sold." I gasped. Cedar Hollow. That was my grandmother's house. I thought it had been sold years ago. My parents told me they sold it to pay for her nursing care. They had kept it, and now they were trying to refinance it, or maybe transfer it, using my name. This wasn't just about debt. This was about theft. Generational theft. I realized then that the Friday meeting was going to be an ambush. They were going to present me with a stack of papers. They would mix the family support agreement, which probably offered me a pittance of an allowance in exchange for control, with the loan documents and the deed transfers. They would pressure me. They would guilt me. They would say, "Just sign here, here, and here. Don't worry about the details. We are helping you." And if I signed, I would be on the hook for a mortgage on a house I didn't own, paying off their debts with my future. I needed to be ready. I spent the next hour backing up everything. I uploaded the photos of the documents to a cloud drive. I emailed them to a secure account I had created years ago for work. I sent copies to Tessa with the subject line, "Recipes just in case, Tessa." I texted, "If I don't text you by noon tomorrow, come to the house, make up an excuse. Just get in here, on it." She replied instantly. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fear was still there. But it was cold now, hard and useful. I wasn't a confused daughter anymore. I was a whistleblower in my own home. Night fell. The house went quiet. I heard my parents go to their room. I heard Ethan's door close. I waited until 2 a.m. Then, I crept downstairs. The house was a tomb. The shadows stretched long and thin across the floor. I walked into the dining room. The table was cleared of food. But the setting remained. The 4 chairs, and the empty space against the wall. The folding chair had been put away. I walked to the sideboard. I found a pad of sticky notes and a pen. I wrote 4 words, reserved for the truth. I walked to the empty spot at the table. My spot. I stuck the note directly onto the polished wood. Right where my plate would have been. It was a small act, a petty act. Maybe. But as I stood there in the dark, looking at that neon yellow square against the dark mahogany, I felt a spark of power. They had removed my seat to shame me. I was reclaiming the space with the one thing they couldn't control. I turned and walked back upstairs, leaving the note to scream into the silence. Tomorrow, they would try to bury me in paper. But they had forgotten that paper cuts both ways. The smell of frying bacon is usually a scent that signals comfort, a promise of lazy mornings and warmth. On Friday morning, however, it smelled like a bribe. I woke to the sound of sizzling fat and the clatter of pans, sounds that were aggressively cheerful, designed to broadcast a message of domestic stability that did not exist. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, my heart already hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The sticky note I had left on the table, reserved for the truth, was gone. I assumed my mother had crumpled it up and thrown it away before the coffee finished brewing, erasing my small rebellion just as she had erased my face from the hallway photo. I dressed in the most professional clothes I had brought with me, a charcoal sweater and dark trousers. I needed armor. I checked my phone. No new texts from the unknown number, just the silence of the facts I had gathered the night before. When I walked into the kitchen, the performance was in full swing. Diane was flipping pancakes with the focus of a surgeon, wearing an apron that looked brand new. Gregory was sitting at the head of the breakfast nook table, reading the Wall Street Journal and chuckling at something on the editorial page. "Morning, sunshine," Gregory boomed. He lowered the paper, his face arranged into a mask of benevolent fatherhood. "Sleep well?" "Fine," I said. My voice was steady, which felt like a victory. Ethan was there, too. He was pushing a piece of melon around his plate, his skin the color of old parchment. He looked like he was about to be sick. Marissa sat next to him, her hands wrapped tight around a mug of tea, her eyes darting between me and Diane like a trapped bird. "Sit. Sit," Diane commanded, gesturing to a chair with her spatula. "I made blueberry pancakes, your favorite, and real maple syrup. None of that corn syrup garbage." I sat down. The table was laden with food. Eggs, bacon, fruit, pastries. It was a feast meant to induce a food coma, a caloric sedative to make me docile. "We have a big morning ahead," Gregory said, folding his newspaper and setting it aside. "But first, fuel. Eat up. Natalie, you look thin. That city stress is eating you alive. I'm healthy." "Dad," I said, taking a single pancake. "We just want to make sure you are taken care of," Diane said, placing a platter of bacon in the center of the table. "That is what families do. We take care of each other." The word family sounded like a threat. We ate in a strange, brittle tension. Gregory told jokes, bad ones about golfers and politicians, and laughed loudly at his own punchlines. Diane kept piling food onto my plate, acting offended every time I didn't take a second helping. Ethan didn't speak. He just drank 3 cups of coffee in rapid succession. When the plates were cleared, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a cold, efficient business energy. Gregory stood up and walked to the sideboard. He returned with a thick leather portfolio and a heavy stack of papers clipped together. He set them down on the table with a thud that made the silverware jump. "All right," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Let us get down to brass tacks." He opened the portfolio. "Your mother and I have been talking," he began, his voice dropping to a serious, confidential register. "We know things have been rocky for you lately. The job change, the financial instability. We know you are struggling, Natalie. And frankly, it hurts us to see you flailing like this." "I am not flailing," I said quietly. "I am building a program." Gregory waved his hand. dismissing my reality, whatever you want to call it. The point is, we want to help. We have put together a structure, a family support agreement, that will give you a monthly stipend to help you get back on your feet. He slid a document toward me. It was titled Robinson Family Trust, Beneficiary Support Addendum. I looked at it. A monthly stipend? Just to bridge the gap? Diane added, her voice sugary. So you don't have to worry about rent or groceries while you find yourself. Gregory tapped the stack of papers. However, to structure this correctly for tax purposes, we need to consolidate some family assets. It is just a restructuring, moving debt, leveraging equity, that sort of thing. Standard operating procedure. Since you are going to be a beneficiary, we need you to sign off on a few things as a formality. A formality? He pushed the thick stack toward me. It was at least 50 pages. There were yellow sticky flags protruding from the side, marking signature lines. Just sign where the flags are, Diane said, handing me a heavy, expensive pen. It is all standard language. We had the lawyers look at it. I didn't pick up the pen. I picked up the stack. I'm going to read it, I said. Gregory's smile faltered. Natalie, it is 40 pages of legalese. It will take you hours. The notary is coming at 11. We don't have time for you to parse every wherefore and heretofore. I have time, I said. I opened the first page. The silence that followed was heavy. I could feel their eyes boring into the top of my head. I started reading. The first few pages were what they said. A support agreement offering me $2,000 a month for 12 months. But the clauses were restrictive. It stipulated that I had to provide monthly bank statements to the grantor, Gregory. It gave them the right to audit my spending. It was not a gift. It was a leash. I kept reading. I flipped past the support agreement. Page 12. Guarantee of payment. Page 15. Co-borrower. Acknowledgement of debt. Page 20. Deed of trust. Transfer. I slowed down. The language was dense, deliberately obfuscating the horror of what was being proposed. But I had spent 5 years in corporate marketing working with contracts. I knew how to hunt for the subject and the verb. The undersigned, Natalie J. Robinson, hereby agrees to assume joint and several liability for the indebtedness secured by the property located at. I scanned down to the property description. 4402 Cedar Hollow Heights, Briar Glen, Pennsylvania. I froze. Cedar Hollow Heights. This was the house my grandmother had lived in, the house my parents claimed they had sold 5 years ago to pay for her end-of-life care. I remembered the conversation vividly. Diane had cried, saying how hard it was to let go of the family home, but that Grandma needed the best care. They hadn't sold it. They had kept it. And now, they were trying to take out a massive loan against it, a second mortgage, or maybe a third, and they were attaching my name to the debt. I looked up. Gregory was drumming his fingers on the table. Diane was picking at a loose thread on her sweater. This isn't just a support agreement, I said. Gregory sighed, an exaggerated sound of patience wearing thin. It is a package. Natalie, the support comes from the liquidity we are freeing up. We can't pay you if we don't restructure the assets. It is basic economics. I looked at the page again. Cedar Hollow Heights. You still own Grandma's house. I said. The air left the room. Diane went still. Gregory's face hardened. We kept it as an investment, Gregory said, his voice sharp. The market was down when she died. We were waiting for it to rebound. You told me you sold it. I said, you told me the money was gone. We did what we had to do to manage the estate, Gregory snapped. Why does it matter? It is an asset. We are leveraging it, and we are cutting you in on the proceeds. Why are you making this difficult? I flipped to the next page. A power of attorney granting Gregory full access to my personal checking accounts. I am not making it difficult, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I am reading what you want me to sign. I read for another 10 minutes. The silence stretched, becoming toxic. I saw a loan amount, $450,000. I saw an interest rate that was variable and predatory. I saw a clause that waived my right to notice of foreclosure. If I signed this, I would be legally responsible for $500,000 of debt on a house I didn't own, with no control over the payments. And I would be granting them the right to drain my own bank accounts if they defaulted. It wasn't a support agreement, it was a suicide pact. I closed the binder. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I can't sign this, I said. Diane stood up. Her chair scraped screechingly against the floor. What do you mean? You can't sign it? She asked, her voice rising to a pitch that hurt my ears. We are trying to help you. We are offering you money. You aren't helping me, I said. You are using me as a co-signer for a loan I can't afford. Gregory slammed his hand on the table. If you were smarter, you wouldn't need so long to understand how business works, he shouted. This was the insult I'd been waiting for. The old classic. If you were smarter, if you were better, if you weren't such a disappointment. He leaned over the table, his face red. You think you are so high and mighty with your little nonprofit charity work? You have no assets. Natalie, you have no equity. Your credit score is the only thing of value you have, and you are hoarding it like a miser while your family drowns. So you admit it, I said. You're drowning. I am restructuring, he roared, and I need this loan to bridge the gap until the commercial park deal closes in January. If I don't get this liquidity, the whole thing seizes up. Do you want that? Do you want to be the reason your brother loses his job? The reason we lose this house? I looked at Ethan. He was staring at the tablecloth, tears standing in his eyes. Ethan? I asked. Ethan didn't look up. We counted on this. Ethan whispered. The words hung in the air. We counted on this. Not we hoped for this. We counted on it. They had made financial commitments based on the assumption that I would submit. They had spent money they didn't have, confident that their manipulation would work. They had bet the farm on my compliance. I stood up. I felt sick, dizzy with the magnitude of the betrayal. I'm not signing today, I said. I need to have a lawyer look at this. Gregory laughed. A harsh, barking sound. A lawyer? You can't afford a lawyer. Then I guess I can't afford to sign. I said. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. Natalie! Diane screamed. Get back here! I walked straight to the back door, grabbed my coat, and stepped out into the cold November air. I didn't run. I walked briskly to the edge of the yard, near the woods that bordered the property. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my phone. I dialed the number for the legal hotline I had saved. It was Friday. They were open. Consumer Rights. This is Mark. Mark, it's Natalie. From yesterday. Natalie, he said. His voice was immediate, alert. Are you safe? I'm safe. But they just presented the papers. It's a home equity loan on a house I didn't know they owned, and a power of attorney. They are pressuring me to sign right now. Do not sign, Mark said. Under no circumstances. If you sign, you are liable. And if they default, which it sounds like they will, the bank will come after you. Not them. I know. I said. I refused. But they are aggressive. They are saying I'm ruining the family. Listen to me. Natalie, that is not legal advice. That is emotional manipulation. You need to separate the two. Morally, they are making you feel responsible. Legally, you are a stranger to their debts. Keep those two worlds separate. Do not argue about morality. Argue facts. Facts, I repeated. Did you get the originals? No. They have the binder. Okay. You need to request copies of everything they just showed you. Tell them you need to review it with counsel. That usually scares scammers, even if the scammers are your parents. And Natalie? Yes? You need to leave that house soon. But before you go, try to get proof of the mail tampering. That is your leverage if things get ugly. I hung up. I stood in the cold for a minute. Breathing in the scent of pine and decaying leaves, I felt a strange transformation taking place in my chest. The little girl who wanted to please her daddy was dying. In her place, a woman was standing up. A woman who knew the difference between love and leverage. I walked back inside. They were still at the table. The silence was thick. Ethan had his head in his hands. Diane was pacing. Gregory was pouring a splash of whiskey into his coffee mug. I walked back to my chair. but I didn't sit. I stood at the head of the table, looking down at them. "I have a question," I said. My voice was calm. "Surgical." Gregory looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "What now?" "Why has my mail been coming here?" I asked. Diane stopped pacing. She smoothed her skirt, her eyes flickering to the left. "We told you," she said, her voice high and tight. "It is just the post office. They get confused because you move so much. We have been meaning to—" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope I had saved. The one from the bank, the one stamped October 15th. I dropped it on the table. It landed on top of the family support agreement. "This is dated October 15th. I said, "It is an account statement for an account I didn't open, and it came here, to this house." Diane stared at the envelope, her mouth opened, then closed. For half a second, the mask dissolved completely, and I saw pure, unadulterated panic. "I don't know what that is," she stammered. "Stop lying." "Mom," I said, "it's over. You opened accounts in my name. You have been intercepting my mail to hide them. That is why you wanted me here, to sign the papers that would legitimize the fraud you already committed." Gregory stood up. "That is enough. You come into this house, eat our food, and accuse your mother of crimes? It is a crime, Dad," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "Identity theft is a crime." I heard a small sound from the other side of the room. Marissa was standing near the doorway, holding a stack of dirty plates. She looked terrified, but she was looking at me, not them. She put the plates down on the sideboard with a clatter. She was practicing. Marissa whispered. Everyone turned to look at her. "What did you say?" Diane snapped. Marissa took a step back, but she kept going. "Last night, I woke up to get water. I heard you in the living room. You were talking to yourself. You were practicing a speech." "Marissa, shut up," Ethan groaned. "No," Marissa said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. She said, "Natalie is finally being useful. We just have to make her feel important." The words hung there, suspended in the kitchen air like toxic dust. Natalie is finally being useful. It wasn't just that they needed money, it was the contempt. To them, my value wasn't in my character, or my work, or my love. My value was strictly utilitarian. I was a tool they had kept in the shed, and now that they needed to pry open a vault, they were finally dusting me off. I looked at Diane. She didn't deny it. She just looked at me with cold, hard eyes, as if daring me to be hurt. I turned to Ethan. He was still looking at the table. "Did you know?" I asked him. He flinched. "Ethan?" He looked up. His face was wet with tears. "I had to." He choked out. "They made me sign last year." "Sign what?" "A loan," he said. "For the business. They said it was short-term, but they maxed it out. My credit is ruined. Nat, I can't get a mortgage for a house with Marissa. I can't do anything." Gregory stepped toward him. "Ethan, keep your mouth shut." "No," Ethan yelled, standing up. "I'm tired of lying." He looked at me, pleading. "They told me you owed us. They said you owed the family for college. That since they paid for your degree, you should help pay for the business." I stared at him. The room seemed to tilt. "They didn't pay for my college." I said, "I paid for my college. I have $50,000 in student loans that I'm still paying off every month." Ethan blinked. "What?" "I took out loans. Ethan, Pell Grants, work study. They gave me $500 a semester for books. That was it." Ethan looked at Gregory. "But you said you put her through school. You said she was ungrateful." Gregory sneered. "We raised her. We fed her. That is worth more than tuition." It was a labyrinth of lies. They had lied to Ethan to justify exploiting me. They had lied to themselves to justify their greed. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 10:30. The notary would be here in 30 minutes. "I am leaving." I said. I turned and walked toward the hallway. "You can't leave," Gregory shouted. "We have an appointment." I stopped and turned back. "Cancel it," I said. I walked up the stairs. I didn't pack everything. I just grabbed my bag, my laptop, and the folder of documents I had found in the basement, which I had retrieved earlier and hidden in my pillowcase. I could hear shouting downstairs. Ethan was yelling. Diane was crying. The loud theatrical sobbing she used when she wanted sympathy. I came back down. Marissa was waiting by the front door. She had her coat on. "I'm going too," she said. "I can't stay here." I nodded. Go to your parents." She hugged me. It was a fierce, desperate hug. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I walked out the front door. The cold air hit me like a blessing. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. Gregory came out onto the porch. He wasn't wearing a coat. He looked smaller than he had an hour ago. Old, desperate. "Natalie," he called out. "Don't do this. We can work something out." I started the engine. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't flip him off. I didn't scream. I just backed out of the driveway. I drove 3 blocks and pulled over in a church parking lot. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't steer. I took 10 deep breaths. In, out, in, out. I wasn't going to run back to Chicago. That would be fleeing. And I wasn't fleeing. I was regrouping. I picked up my phone. I called the number for Briar Glen Community Bank. Not my parents' bank, a different one. Appointments desk. "Hi," I said. My voice was rock steady. "I need to make an appointment for Monday morning to discuss a fraud alert and a secure account opening. We have an opening at 9. I'll take it." Then I called a number I had found online for a local attorney in the next town over. Wexler Falls, Elena Parkhurst, Estate Fraud Law, Parkhurst Law. "Hi," I said. "I have an emergency situation regarding unauthorized deed transfers and identity theft involving a family trust. I have documentation. Can I come in on Monday? Can you be here at 10:30? "Yes," I said. "I will be there." I hung up. I looked in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were clear. I wasn't the disappointment anymore. I was the plaintiff. I put the car in drive. I wasn't going to fight them with shouting matches in the kitchen. I wasn't going to let them drag me into their emotional mud pit. I was going to fight them with paper. I was going to fight them with dates, and signatures, and the cold, hard truth of the law. I drove toward the highway, leaving the empty seat at the table behind me. I drove around for 2 hours after leaving the church parking lot. I drove past the high school where I had graduated with honors, past the park where I used to catch fireflies, and past the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. The geography of Briar Glen was a map of my own history, every corner holding a memory that was now being rewritten by the people who had made me. Eventually, I turned the car around. I had to go back. Not because I was surrendering. Not because I was ready to sign their papers. I went back because my suitcase was still in the guest room. My laptop charger was plugged into the wall, and I realized that fleeing would be interpreted as a temper tantrum. If I disappeared now, they would spin the narrative. Natalie had a meltdown. Natalie is unstable. Poor Natalie just couldn't handle the pressure. I needed to return to the scene of the crime not as a victim, but as a witness. When I walked back into the house, the silence was heavy, pressurized. I expected shouting. I expected Gregory to be waiting at the door with a vein throbbing in his temple. Instead, I found them in the living room, watching a cooking show. They didn't look angry. They looked wounded. "Natalie," Diane said, her voice soft and trembling. She was curled up on the sofa with a blanket, a cup of tea in her hands. "We were so worried. You just ran off." "I didn't run off," I said, hanging my coat up. "I went to clear my head." Gregory sighed, taking off his reading glasses. He looked tired. He looked smaller than he had that morning. His posture slumped. "We are just trying to help, kiddo," he said. "That is all this was. A way to help you get back on your feet, and you react like we are trying to hurt you. It is hurtful. Natalie, to have your own daughter treat you like an enemy." This was the pivot. The anger hadn't worked. The intimidation hadn't worked. So now they were deploying the guilt. They were rewriting the morning's coercion into a misunderstood act of charity. I stood in the doorway, feeling the familiar tug in my chest. I loved them. That was the inconvenient, jagged truth that made this so difficult. If they were strangers, I would have called the police hours ago, but they were my parents. I remembered them teaching me to ride a bike. I remembered Gregory carrying me on his shoulders. The grief of reconciling those memories with the people sitting in front of me, people who would ruin my financial future to save their own pride, was a physical ache. "I am not treating you like an enemy," I said quietly. "I am treating you like people who are asking me to sign a loan I cannot afford." Diane wiped a tear from her cheek. "You are being so dramatic. Natalie, you always have been. You take everything so personally." I didn't argue. I didn't point out that identity theft is inherently personal. I just nodded, exhausted. "I'm going to lie down for a bit," I said. I went upstairs and closed my door. I didn't lie down. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I connected to the Wi-Fi. Their password was still Success1985, and logged into a credit monitoring service I had signed up for years ago but rarely checked. I navigated to the Inquiries tab. There it was, November 2nd, Hard Inquiry, Linden Federal Credit Union, and right below it, another one I hadn't expected. November 10th, Hard Inquiry, Briar Glen Title Escrow. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. A hard inquiry meant someone had applied for credit or a transfer of liability. They had done this 3 weeks ago. They had initiated the process regarding the Cedar Hollow Heights property before I even arrived, before the missing seat joke, before the family support agreement was even printed. It wasn't catastrophic yet. An inquiry wasn't a loan. It just meant they had tried. But it was proof. It was the smoking gun that proved they had used my social security number without my consent. I needed more. I needed to know what the title company had. I checked the time. It was 1 o'clock on Friday. The title office might be open. I grabbed my purse and went back downstairs. "I'm running a quick errand." I called out. Diane didn't answer. She just sniffed loudly from the couch. A martyr in cashmere. I drove to the other side of town, to a small brick building with a sign that read, Briar Glen Title Escrow. The parking lot was mostly empty, but the open sign was lit. Inside, the office smelled of stale coffee and toner. A woman with gray hair and kind eyes sat behind the front desk. "Can I help you?" "Hun?" she asked. "Hi," I said, trying to project a breezy, unbothered confidence. "My name is Natalie Robinson. My mother, Diane, said she stopped by last week to drop off some paperwork for a file we are working on. She wanted me to check if you needed anything else from me while I'm in town." The woman frowned, typing my name into her computer. Robinson. She stopped typing. Her eyes scanned the screen, and I saw her posture stiffen. "Oh," she said. "Is something wrong?" I asked. She looked at me, and the professional warmth evaporated, replaced by a guarded caution. "I am sorry. Ms. Robinson. I can't discuss the details of this file without the primary file holder present. That would be my father. Gregory?" She didn't nod, but she didn't shake her head. She just looked at me with a mixture of pity and warning. "It is listed as an incomplete file," she said carefully, "pending signatures. But if you are the Natalie Robinson listed on the deed transfer..." "Deed transfer?" My stomach dropped. Not just a loan, a transfer. Were they trying to put the house entirely in my name? To dump a toxic asset on me? "Yes." I pressed. "I can't say more," she said, lowering her voice. "But if I were you, I would make a formal request for the file history, in writing, and I wouldn't sign anything until you see the title search. There are liens, plural." "Thank you," I whispered. She gave me a small, tight nod. "You didn't hear it from me." I walked back to my car, my legs feeling like lead. Liens. They hadn't just kept my grandmother's house. They had borrowed against it, again and again, until it was underwater, and now they were trying to transfer the deed to me, along with the debt, so they could wash their hands of it. They weren't asking me to co-sign a loan to save the family. They were framing me to take the fall for a foreclosure. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to the police station, but a small, stupid part of me, the daughter part, was still bargaining. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they don't realize what they are doing. I drove back to the house. When I entered the kitchen, Marissa was there. She was filling a glass with water. her hand shaking so bad the ice was rattling against the glass. She looked up and saw me. She checked the hallway to make sure we were alone. "Natalie," she whispered. "Hey," I said. "You okay?" "No," she said. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. "Look." She handed me the phone. It was an email chain. From Diane Robinson. Catering by Jean-Luc. Subject, deposit question. Hi Jean-Luc. Regarding the $5,000 deposit for the wedding reception, please hold the check until Friday the 29th. We are moving some funds around from a trust distribution that clears that morning. I looked at the date of the email. 2 days ago. Trust distribution. I read aloud. That's me. I am the trust distribution. Marissa nodded, her eyes filling with tears. There is more. Look at the florist. I scrolled. Another email. Please delay the billing. Waiting on funds. Family restructuring. She is using you, Marissa said, her voice cracking. She is booking all these things for the wedding. Things we didn't even ask for. And she is promising to pay for them with money she expects to get from whatever they are doing to you. I handed the phone back. It wasn't just my credit. It was Ethan's wedding. It was their social standing. They were funding a lifestyle they couldn't afford by mortgaging their children's futures. Marissa, I said gently, you need to tell the vendors. I know, she sobbed quietly. But if I do, Diane will cancel the wedding. She controls the guest list. She controls everything. She doesn't control you. I said, not unless you let her. Marissa looked at me, and I saw the terror in her eyes. It was the terror of a woman realizing she was marrying into a burning building. Where is Ethan? I asked. In the garage, she said. He hasn't come out since this morning. I went to the garage. It was cold, the concrete floor radiating a damp chill. Ethan was sitting on an overturned bucket near the workbench, his head in his hands. He looked up when I walked in. His eyes were red-rimmed. Go away. Nat, he croaked. I'm not going away, I said. I walked over and leaned against the workbench. Marissa showed me the emails. He flinched. She shouldn't have done that. Ethan, I said, my voice low. They are broke, aren't they? He let out a long, shuddering breath. It was a sound of total defeat. It's the development deal, he said, his voice dull. The medical park. Dad put everything into it. Leverage on leverage. Then the city delayed the permits. The investors pulled out. He is holding a note for $2 million that is due in January. If he doesn't pay it, he loses the business. He loses the house. He loses everything. So he needs me to take the fall for Cedar Hollow so he can free up some cash? I asked. He needs a clean name, Ethan said. He has maxed out everything else. He needs someone with a credit score over 700 to secure the bridge loan. And you knew? I suspected. He said, but, Nat, you don't understand. What don't I understand? I asked. He looked up at me, and his face was a mask of misery. They threatened me. Threatened you how? My job, he whispered. Crestline, Dad knows the VP of sales. He told me that if I didn't help them, if I didn't get you to sign, he would make a call. He would tell them I was skimming or that I was unstable. He said he would burn my reputation to the ground. I stared at him. This wasn't just financial desperation. This was extortion. He would do that? To his own son? Ethan laughed. A wet, bitter sound. He thinks he is teaching me a lesson about loyalty. He says, a Robinson does what is necessary for the family. I felt a wave of nausea. This was the man who had taught me to tie my shoes. This was the man who had grilled burgers at my graduation party. He was a monster, a desperate, cornered monster. And you were going to let him do it to me, I said, to save yourself. Ethan didn't answer. He just looked down at his hands. I am sorry. Nat, he whispered, I am so sorry. I looked at my brother. I loved him, but I couldn't save him. He was already drowning. He had tied himself to their anchor years ago, and now he was too afraid to cut the rope. I walked out of the garage. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The grief was still there, but the confusion was gone. I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I went back inside. Diane and Gregory were still in the living room. The TV was on, but the volume was muted. They were talking in low, urgent tones. They stopped when I walked past the doorway. "Natalie," Diane called out, "come sit with us. Let's watch a movie. Like old times." "No, thank you," I said. "I have some work to finish." I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. On the counter, Diane's iPad was propped up on a stand. The screen was lit. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. It was open to a video editing app. Thanksgiving 2024. Draft. I pressed play. It was a montage of photos and video clips from the last 2 days. The perfectly roasted turkey. The table setting. Carefully angled so the missing seat wasn't visible. A clip of Ethan and Marissa clinking glasses. Looking forcedly happy. Then, a voiceover. It was Diane's voice, recorded in that smooth, public-facing tone she used for church readings. So grateful for family unity this year. The voiceover said, "Through thick and thin, we stick together. Even Natalie showed such maturity this year, stepping up to help us build a future. It is a blessing to see your children finally understand the value of sacrifice." I froze. Even Natalie showed such maturity, finally understand the value of sacrifice. She had recorded this. She had planned this narrative. She expected me to sign. She expected me to surrender. And she had already scripted the caption for her victory lap on Facebook. To them, my capitulation wasn't a tragedy. It was a plot point in their story of success. Natalie. The disappointment finally becomes Natalie the useful tool. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. It wasn't the hot, reactive anger of the morning. It was ice. It was diamond hard. I went upstairs to my room. I sat at the desk. I pulled out a sheet of plain white paper. I didn't write a resignation letter. I didn't write a manifesto. I wrote a boundary to Gregory and Diane. 1. I am aware of the unauthorized inquiries on my credit report from Linden Federal and Briar Glen Title, dated November 2nd and November 10th. 2. I am aware that my name is listed on a deed transfer and loan application for 4402 Cedar Hollow Heights, without my consent. 3. I am aware that my mail has been intercepted and withheld. I will not be signing any documents. I will be placing a fraud alert on my credit file immediately. I will be meeting with legal counsel on Monday to review the unauthorized use of my identity. If you attempt to use my name for any financial transaction again, I will file a police report. This is not a negotiation. Natalie. I folded the paper. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Diane. She knocked on my door. It was a soft, tentative knock. "Natalie?" she called. "Dinner is almost ready. I made pot roast." I opened the door. Diane stood there, smiling. She had reapplied her lipstick. "Come down," she said. "Your father is making cocktails. We can put this whole ugly business behind us. We don't have to talk about money tonight, just family." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, who had rehearsed a speech about my usefulness, who had hidden my mail and erased my face from the hallway. I handed her the letter. "What is this?" she asked. Taking it. "Read it," I said. She unfolded the paper. She stood in the hallway, under the soft glow of the sconce light. As she read, her face changed. The smile didn't just fade, it shattered. Her skin went gray. Her eyes narrowed into slits. She finished reading. She looked up at me. The wounded mother was gone. The martyr was gone. "You ungrateful little bitch," she whispered. The vulgarity was shocking. Diane Robinson did not swear. "We gave you life," she hissed, stepping closer. "We gave you everything. And you threaten us? With lawyers? With police?" "I am protecting myself," I said calmly. "Protecting yourself?" She laughed. A cold, jagged sound. "You are protecting nothing. You are a zero. Natalie, you have always been a zero. That is why we removed your seat." I went still. "What? You think it was a joke?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "It wasn't a joke. We discussed it for days," Gregory said. If she isn't going to contribute, she doesn't get a place. You don't deserve to be seen as family until you contribute. You are just a drain, a disappointment. There it was, the core belief, the thing I had suspected my whole life but never wanted to believe. Their love was a transaction. I was an investment that hadn't paid out, and they were finally liquidating the asset. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to beg for her approval. I didn't feel the need to explain myself. "Thank you," I said. She blinked. "Thank you? For telling me the truth," I said. Finally, I closed the door in her face. I locked it. I heard her scream my name. I heard her pounding on the door. I heard Gregory running up the stairs. "Natalie, open this door," he shouted. "You listen to me. You walk out on this family, and you are dead to us. Do you hear me? Dead." I didn't answer. I grabbed my suitcase. I threw my clothes in. I didn't fold them. I grabbed my laptop. I grabbed the folder of stolen documents. I waited. They pounded on the door for 10 minutes. Then, the shouting turned to hushed, frantic whispering. Then, silence. They were regrouping. They were probably calling the bank, trying to salvage the wreckage. I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by the window, watching the streetlights hum in the darkness. At 4 a.m, the house was silent. I picked up my bag. I opened the door. I walked down the hallway. I passed the spot where the family photo hung, the one with me cropped out. I didn't look at it. I walked down the stairs. I went into the dining room. The table was still set for the dinner I hadn't eaten. The pot roast was sitting in the center, cold and congealed in its fat. I walked to the sideboard. I opened the drawer where I had found the hidden place card. Natalie. I took it out. It was a nice card, heavy stock, cream-colored. I walked to the table. I placed my letter, the one Diane had crumpled and thrown on the floor, which I had retrieved, smoothly on the center of the table. I weighed it down with the salt shaker so they couldn't miss it. Then, I looked at the empty space where my seat should have been. I slipped the place card into my pocket. I wasn't taking it because I wanted to be part of their table. I was taking it because it belonged to me. My name belonged to me. My identity belonged to me. And they didn't get to keep it in a drawer anymore. I walked out the front door into the biting pre-dawn air. The sky was a deep, bruised purple. Snow was beginning to fall again, dusting the world in white. I got into my car. I put the key in the ignition. I looked at the house one last time. It looked beautiful in the snow. It looked like a home, but I knew better now. It wasn't a home. It was a stage, and I was done performing. I backed out of the driveway and drove into the dark, toward the highway, toward Monday, toward the truth. Wexler Falls was a town of brick and iron, a place that felt heavier and more serious than the manicured facades of Briar Glen. I sat in a waiting room that smelled of lemon polish and old paper, my hands resting on my knees to keep them from trembling. The sign on the frosted glass door read, Elena Parkhurst, attorney at law. It was Monday morning. The holiday weekend was over, and with it, the illusion that I could just drive back to Chicago and pretend none of this had happened. When the door opened, Elena Parkhurst looked exactly like the kind of person you wanted in a foxhole. She was in her 50s, wearing a sharp navy suit and glasses that magnified her intense, intelligent eyes. She didn't smile, but she nodded at me with a look that said she had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. "Ms. Robinson," she said. Her voice was gravel and silk. "Come in." I sat in a leather chair across from her massive oak desk. I spent the next hour laying out the architecture of my family's betrayal. I did not cry. I treated it like a business presentation. I laid out the timeline. August, the hard inquiry on my credit report from Linden Federal Credit Union. September, the interception of my mail began. October, the forged signature on the loan application for the Cedar Hollow Heights property. November, the invitation to Thanksgiving, the missing seat, the pressure to sign the support agreement. I placed the photos I had taken in the basement on her desk. I placed the envelope with the bank statement I had rescued from the kitchen table. Finally, I placed my phone on the desk, showing the screenshot of the text message from the unknown number. Someone who knows what they did to your grandmother's will. Elena put on her glasses and picked up the photo of the signature page. She studied it for a long time. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "This is good work. Natalie," she said finally, setting the photo down. "Most people in your position are too emotional to document. They scream, they fight, they shred things. You gathered evidence. That is going to save you." "Is it enough?" I asked. "It is more than enough to establish probable cause for fraud and identity theft," she said. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. "Here is the reality. You have two choices. You can go to the police right now. With this, they would likely arrest your parents within 24 hours. My stomach twisted. The thought of my father in handcuffs, my mother in a holding cell, it felt like a violence I wasn't ready to commit. Even after everything, Elena watched my face, or she continued, "We handle this civilly, but aggressively. We place a fraud alert on all 3 bureaus immediately. We send a formal cease and desist letter to your parents and to every financial institution involved, stating that the signatures are forgeries and that you contest the debt. We demand a full accounting of the grandmother's estate. We lock down your identity so tight that they cannot buy a pack of gum in your name." I took a deep breath. "Option 2. I said. Elena nodded. "I thought so. It is the cleaner path for now, but you need to understand something. Natalie, once I send these letters, there is no going back. This isn't a family spat anymore. This is a legal conflict. You are severing the financial limb to save the body. They will not forgive you for this." I looked at the stack of papers. I thought about the folding chair. I thought about Diane practicing her speech about me being useful. They never forgave me for being myself. I said quietly, "I might as well give them a real reason." Elena began typing. The sound of the keys clacking was rhythmic, soothing. It sounded like bricks being laid to build a wall. "I need you to do one thing," she said without looking up. "You mentioned you left some original documents in the house? The originals of the mail?" "Yes." I said, "And the place card. I want those." She said, "Copies are good. Originals are better, if you can retrieve them safely. Do it, but do not go alone, and do not engage. You are a courier today, not a daughter." I drove back to Briar Glen under a sky that looked like a bruised plum. The snow had stopped, but the ground was covered in a fresh white sheet that hid the decay of autumn. I wasn't alone. Tessa Hart was in the passenger seat, gripping the door handle. "You sure about this?" Tessa asked. Her voice was tight. "I can go in with you. I can cause a scene. I am really good at causing scenes." "No," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "I need you in the car. If I am not out in 15 minutes, or if you hear shouting, you call the police. That is the deal." Tessa nodded. She looked at me with a mixture of respect and sadness. "You are different, Nat. You are scary calm. I am not calm." I said, "I am just done." I had texted Marissa earlier. She was inside. She was my inside man. She had told me that Gregory and Diane were home, pacing, trying to figure out their next move. They didn't know I had gone to a lawyer. They probably thought I was sulking in a hotel, waiting for them to apologize so I could come back and sign their papers. I pulled into the driveway of 1402 Elm Street. The house looked magnificent. The wreath on the door was perfectly centered. The windows gleamed. It was a monument to appearances. I put the car in park. "Keep the engine running." I told Tessa. I walked to the front door. I didn't use my key. I rang the doorbell. It took a full minute for the door to open. When it did, Gregory stood there. He looked haggard. He was wearing the same clothes he had been wearing on Friday. His shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "Natalie," he breathed. The relief on his face was instant and pathetic. "Thank God." "Come in. Come in. We were just—" I stepped past him into the foyer. I didn't take off my coat. I didn't smile. "I am here for my things," I said. Gregory closed the door, his relief morphing into confusion. "Your things? You mean your clothes? We can get those. But first, we need to talk. We need to fix this." I walked straight to the dining room. Diane was there, sitting at the table. She was surrounded by papers, not legal papers, but wedding swatches. She was frantically arranging fabric samples, as if planning the perfect centerpiece could stop the world from ending. "Natalie," she exclaimed. Standing up, she smoothed her skirt, her face composing itself into that mask of maternal concern. "You came back. I knew you would. I told Gregory. She just needs to cool off." Marissa was standing in the corner near the kitchen door. She looked pale and terrified, but when our eyes met, she gave me a microscopic nod. She had put the stack of mail I had left on the dresser into her purse. She had it. "I am not back. Mom," I said, "I am just passing through." Gregory followed me into the room. He stood at the head of the table, gripping the back of his chair, the chair that wasn't a folding chair. "Stop it, Natalie," he said, his voice rough. "Stop the theatrics. We are a family. We solve problems internally. You don't run off. You don't write threatening letters. You don't forge your daughter's signature." I said. Gregory flinched. He looked at Marissa, then back at me. "I did what I had to do." He exploded. "It wasn't malicious. Natalie, it was for the family. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under?" He began to pace, his hands flying in the air. "The medical park deal fell through," he said, his voice rising. "The city pulled the permits. I had $2 million leveraged on that land. And then your grandmother's estate. There were taxes. Natalie, estate taxes we didn't anticipate. Then your mother needed that surgery on her hip last year. The one we told you was covered by insurance? It wasn't. We paid out of pocket. It snowballed." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I needed a bridge," he said. "Just a temporary bridge. I was going to pay it back. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to save us. If I lose this house, if I lose the business, what happens to us? What happens to the Robinson name?" I watched him. I listened to his list of calamities. The taxes, the surgery, the bad deal. I believed him. I believed he was desperate. I believed he was terrified of losing his status. But I noticed what was missing. He didn't say, "I am sorry I humiliated you." He didn't say, "I am sorry I made you feel small." He didn't say, "I am sorry I stole your name." He was only sorry that his math hadn't worked out. He was apologizing for the failure of his scheme, not the cruelty of it. "You did it for the family," I repeated flatly. "But you forgot that I am part of the family. You sacrificed me to save the reputation of the family name. You were willing to ruin my life so you wouldn't have to admit you were broke." Diane slammed her hand on the table. The fabric swatches jumped. "Oh, stop being such a victim," she snapped. Her voice was ice cold, cutting through Gregory's panicked rambling. "We didn't sacrifice you. We gave you an opportunity to step up." She walked around the table, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "You call it humiliation," she said, gesturing to the empty spot where my chair should have been. "I call it tough love. You have been drifting for years. Natalie, walking away from good jobs, living in that tiny apartment. We wanted to motivate you. We wanted you to understand that in the real world, you don't get a seat at the table just because you exist. You get a seat because you bring something to it." I looked at her. She wasn't denying it. She was justifying it. She was framing my abuse as a morality lesson. "So my worth is tied to my obedience." I said, "That is what you are saying. If I give you my credit score, I get a chair. If I don't, I stand in the corner." Diane crossed her arms. Her chin went up. "That is how the world works. Natalie, relationships are reciprocal. We raised you. We invested in you. It is time for a return on investment." A return on investment. I felt the final tether snap. The last tiny fraying thread of hope that they loved me for me disintegrated. I looked at the woman who had nursed me through chickenpox. I looked at the man who had taught me to drive. And I saw strangers. I saw creditors calling in a debt I never agreed to owe. "I am exhausted," I said softly. They both stopped. The quietness of my voice seemed to rattle them more than shouting would have. I am exhausted from auditioning for you. I continued. I have spent 33 years trying to figure out what role you wanted me to play so you would love me. The smart daughter, the successful daughter, the quiet daughter, and now, the useful daughter. I looked at Gregory. You say I am a disappointment, Dad, but you are the one who committed a felony to pay for a country club membership you can't afford. Gregory's face turned purple. And you, Mom, I said, turning to her. You talk about family unity, but you printed a place card for everyone except me. You planned my exclusion. That isn't love. That is management. I am not auditioning anymore. I said, the show is over. Suddenly, a voice came from the doorway to the kitchen. I watched them do it. We all turned. Ethan was standing there. He looked terrible. He was wearing sweatpants, his hair unwashed. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at our parents. Ethan? Diane said sharply. Go back to your room. No, Ethan said. He walked into the dining room. He stood next to Marissa. He took her hand. I saw Marissa squeeze his fingers, her knuckles white. I watched them do it. Ethan said again, his voice gaining a little strength. Tuesday night, Mom was setting the table. Dad brought up the folding chair from the basement. They were laughing. Ethan! Gregory barked. They were laughing. Ethan said, looking at me now. Dad said, this will wake her up, Mom said. Maybe she will finally get the message. And I stood there and watched. I laughed too. Nat, because I was so relieved it wasn't me. He started to cry. It wasn't the loud, performative crying of my mother. It was a quiet, leaking shame. I knew about the loans. Ethan said, I knew about the fraud, and I let them do it because I was afraid they would cut me off. I sold you out for a down payment on a house I can't even afford. The room was silent. The united front had cracked. Ethan, the golden child, the future son, had just admitted that the foundation of this house was rot. Diane looked at Ethan with pure disgust. You are weak, she spat. Just like her. Ethan nodded. Yeah, I am. But at least I'm saying it. He looked at me. I am sorry. Natalie, I know that doesn't fix it. But I am sorry. I looked at my brother. I saw the fear in him, the lifetime of conditioning that he was trying, clumsily, to break. It didn't fix the credit inquiries. It didn't fix the betrayal. But it was real. Thank you. Ethan, I said. I turned back to Gregory and Diane. They were standing side by side, united in their outrage. Two captains on a sinking ship blaming the ocean for being wet. Marissa walked forward. She handed me a small stack of envelopes and the cream-colored place card I had left on the table. She placed them in my hand. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was up. I put the documents in my bag. I zipped it closed. The sound of the zipper was loud in the room. I have hired an attorney, I said. The color drained from Gregory's face completely. Her name is Elena Parkhurst. She is based in Wexler Falls. You will be receiving a letter from her tomorrow. It outlines the fraud alerts I have placed on my accounts and the formal request for a full accounting of Grandma's estate. Natalie, don't, Gregory whispered. He sounded old. If you do that, the investors, the bank, they will see the alerts. They will call the loans. We will be ruined. You ruined yourselves, I said. I am just turning on the lights. Diane stepped forward. She looked like she wanted to strike me. If you walk out that door, she hissed, do not think you can ever come back. There will be no Christmas, no birthdays, no nothing. You will be alone. Do you hear me? You will have no family. I looked at her. I looked at the pristine table. I looked at the new family photo in the hall that had already erased me. I realized then that I had been alone in this house for a long time. The only difference was that now, I wasn't waiting for permission to leave. I took a breath. The air in my lungs felt clean. I'm not available for this anymore. I said 6 words, quiet, steady. I didn't shout them. I didn't cry them. I just stated them as a fact, like the weather or the time of day. I'm not available for this anymore. I wasn't available to be their victim. I wasn't available to be their savior. I wasn't available to be their disappointment. Diane went still. She stared at me, searching for a crack in my armor, a loose thread she could pull to unravel me. She found nothing. She smiled then. It was a terrible, jagged smile. "Fine," she said. "Then go. Don't come back. You will regret this," Gregory muttered, turning his back to me. "You will come crawling back when you realize nobody else cares about you." Ethan looked like he wanted to say something, like he might walk out the door with me. He took a step, then stopped. He looked at Marissa. He looked at his father. He stayed. He wasn't ready yet. He might never be ready. That was his tragedy to write. I turned around. I walked to the front door. I opened it. The cold air rushed in to meet me. The snow was falling harder now. Big soft flakes that muffled the world. I walked down the steps. I walked down the walkway where I had scraped my knee when I was 6. I walked to my car. Tessa unlocked the doors. I got in. "Drive," I said. Tessa didn't ask questions. She put the car in gear and pulled out of the driveway. I didn't look back at the house. I knew what it looked like. It looked perfect. It looked like the American dream. But inside, the table was set for a feast that no one could stomach. I watched the snow swirl in the headlights, mesmerizing and chaotic. I touched the bag on my lap, feeling the sharp edges of the documents inside. They were heavy, but they were mine. I was driving into a blizzard. I had no family home to return to. I had a legal battle ahead of me. I had a brother I might never speak to again. But for the first time in 33 years, I had a seat. It was the driver's seat, and the road ahead, though white and unwritten, belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to No Seat for Disappointments. My parents said, "Removing my seat," at Thanksgiving dinner. So I said, I hope you found Natalie's journey of claiming her self-worth empowering. It is a hard thing to break the cycle of family toxicity, but sometimes, walking away is the strongest move you can make. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever had to draw a hard boundary with family during the holidays? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new episode. We have plenty more stories of justice, karma, and reclaiming power coming your way. Take care of yourselves. And remember, you always deserve a seat at the table. See you in the next one.